microphones working. You want to put them on? They've got, oh, never mind. Good evening. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I have a new toy, and it is control of the microphones. So forgive me in advance. We will, Mr. Carr, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very kindly. And we will move straight into announcements. Let me just say that, board members, keep in mind that the microphones that are in front of you are very, very sensitive. I will turn them all into mute after we go through announcements. So if you need to speak, please signal to me so I can turn your mics on. We'll start with Ms. Frogue. Any announcements? No. None? Mr. Hayes? Mr. Pinkston?
None.
Ms. Shepherd?
I do have a few announcements. I was lucky enough to be able to represent the Metro Nashville Public School Board of Education at the annual Academies in Nashville retreat held Friday, May the 31st through Saturday, June 1st. And all I can say is, whew, it was a lot. It was very intense, but it was it was packed, had a lot of good information in it. Chief Academic Officer Jay Steele and Chief Education Officer for the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, Mark Hill, facilitated this event, and they did a fabulous job. I learned quite a lot of information. I want to thank the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce and the Ford Foundation for hosting this retreat, and I really appreciate being able to represent the board on that. And I would like to, and I know we're not live tonight, but I would like to announce for our viewing audience that to set your calendars for Tuesday, July 30th, the McGavock Cluster Coalition will be hosting a town hall meeting at 5:30 that night at McGavock High School for all parents, students, faculty, staff, prospective students, community members to come out to McGavock High School to check out, to see everything that's happening at our wonderful community school. And speaking of McGavock High School, I will say that they recently went wall to wall, no pun intended, with having all model status academies at that school. They are the only academy school in the nation that has wall to wall model academies at McGavock High School. So kudos to Robin Wall and his faculty and staff at McGavock High School.
Thank you.
That concludes my announcements.
Ms. Kim? Mr. Spearing? Dr. Brandon? Okay, I just have a couple of announcements, and we'll move right ahead into our business. June 25th, 5 p.m., we will have a special meeting instead of our regularly scheduled work session. It will be on the charter approvals. The Charter School Division of the Office of Innovation will be submitting their recommendations for charter approvals. Again, it will be a regularly scheduled meeting. It will not be a work session. The next regular board meeting will be held on July 9th. After that, and we will have a work session in July. Normally we do not, but because of the charter school recommendations, we have moved our work session to July. So please plan accordingly. The work session will be held July 23rd. Also, and I'm looking for this, on June 20th, our own Ms. Frogue will be guest speaker for the Democratic Women's, give me the title.
The Davidson County Democratic Women.
Davidson County Democratic Women. She will be speaking at that event. So it will be held at the Shoney's on Thompson Lane, 6 p.m. So anybody who can come and support Ms. Frogue, please do so. Dr. Register, any announcements from you? Fantastic. Oh, one other thing, too. I wanted to, you guys may have seen this, Stratford STEM Magnet High School has sent an invitation Monday, June 17th, 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the East Centric Pavilion. They will be reviewing, and this is a really inspiring documentary. I've seen it. Join us to view a powerful and inspiring documentary through the voice of students and staff at the new Stratford STEM Magnet High. This short film will show East Nashville how our school is improving student achievement and impacting your community. Our panel guests will include Chief Academic Officer Jay Steele, Executive Principal Michael Steele, Councilman Anthony Davis, President and CEO of Adventure Science Center Susan Dubenhage, Director, Middle Tennessee STEM Innovation Hub, Dr. Vicki Metzger, Academy Coach, Dr. Jennifer Berry, and the moderator will be Councilman Peter Westerholm. This is an amazing documentary. It's very short, and the conversations will be very, very poignant and intense. So if you are able to do that on next Monday, please do so. Next, we will move into awards and recognitions, and seeing none, we will slide right into public participation. As I call your name, please come to the microphone. The board will hear from those persons who have requested to appear at this board meeting. In the interest of time, speakers are requested to limit remarks to 3 minutes or less. Comments will be timed, and at the end of your comments, once you hear the timer, please end your conversations and leave the podium. We would appreciate it very much. First up, Mr. Chris Moth.
Thank you. I'm Chris Moth. I'm a parent of a rising 8th grader at J.T. Moore Middle. Too many Nashville families still believe that when poor children walk into a school building, that school becomes unsafe and education suffers. Everyone in this room knows that to be false. At J.T. Moore last fall, 120 kids, 7th, 8th, and even a few 6th graders were placed in high school credit Algebra 1. 95% of those kids scored proficient or advanced on the state end of course exam. 95%. The state is a bit inefficient, and statewide scores are still embargoed, but last year, only 50% of Tennessee's children passed that same EOC. State, 50%, J.T. Moore, 95%. Our 6th graders went 100%, by the way. On the flip side, we have some kids who arrive at J.T. Moore below basic. Principal Hughes set up a charter-inspired experiment. With parent opt-in, he put a small classroom of boys together with one experienced teacher throughout the day. After a year, over half of those boys who were basic or below are now proficient. I think that's amazing. We know that kids from different economic circumstances can benefit from varying educational approaches. We also know how to install those approaches at our neighborhood schools. We just need the will to break out of our 1980s mindset that tells Nashville the only path to education is a long drive across town. Charter school proliferation is becoming a particularly big headache. This came to my mailbox from Boys Prep. It states, and I quote, "Your son deserves a safe learning environment. Boys Prep has strong anti-fighting and anti-bullying policies because you should never have to worry about your child's safety at school." Wow. Our schools are unsafe? That's ridiculous. Thanks to the zero tolerance policies of this board, our schools are incredibly safe. Why are you funding this marketing campaign of nonsense? Why do you funnel my tax dollars into proclamations that my neighbors should run from J.T. Moore? Let's demand that Boys Prep starts to tell the real truth, which is that they have the highest attrition rate of any charter except for Smithson Craighead. Let's tell the real truth, that J.T. Moore does an even better job for Nashville's boys. Friends, let's take a breather from charter school proliferation this year. We simply lack the time and the energy to police the endless stream of applications, marketing misinformation, and closure lawsuits. The Achievement School District is already going to open plenty of charter schools in Nashville this year. Let's put our applications on hold and tell Nashville that we're going to put our energies into making all our neighborhood schools great. MNPS outscores Tennessee in every rational metric. This year, let's tell our friends at the Capitol that we are not going to let charter schools take our foot off the accelerator. Thanks for listening, and I have copies here of the Boys Prep marketing materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moth. Jennifer Smith.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening. My name is Jennifer Crosland Smith. I'm currently a stay-at-home mother, but I'm a trained speech-language pathologist who specialized in childhood language disorders during my postgraduate study. I have a son who's a rising 4th grader at Gower Elementary and a daughter who will be joining him for kindergarten this coming year. My son took the TCAP for the first time in April, and I was aware that he'd been prepared for this test for a long time, as you can see here by this first grade preparation TCAP manual. But this year I decided to do a little bit more research on it. And when I finally was able to track down a calendar, a testing calendar, I was appalled at the number of standardized tests that our children are subjected to throughout the year. In addition to my anger about the number of tests, I was frustrated that I had to do my own investigation to find out which tests were administered and what the purpose of those tests are. So I stand here now to ask two things of you. The first thing is to please require that each school send home a calendar of test administrations and the purpose of each test at the beginning of the school year. It would also be helpful if you could note which government entity is requiring administration of those tests. In addition, parents deserve to know what tests are being given, what purpose these tests serve, and who is requiring these tests of our children. And second, please reduce the number of tests that are given to our kids. I know that you all cannot control what is mandated by the state or the federal government, but I know that there are some tests that are mandated by the district. And for example, the SAT-10 and DIBELS, and based on my own research and my own knowledge of childhood language disorders, those are two that I believe should be immediately eliminated. I know you, so in summary, standardized testing and test preparation create undue anxiety for our children. They rob our children of precious instruction time in the classroom. They incorrectly imply that children's skills can be adequately measured via a snapshot exam, and creates an unhealthy and irrational level of competition in our schools, and creates a system of winners and losers. My job as a parent is to create a nurturing environment so my children can pursue their unique talents and dreams so they can become the best they can be. Sadly, high-stakes standardized tests have robbed our schools of the ability to do the same for the children in their care. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thomas Weber?
Thank you. My name is Thomas Weber, and I live on 72 Valeria Street. In recent years, accountability has become a popular buzzword. An army of tools have been employed in the name of accountability. Some of the tools are highly efficient, some are wholly inappropriate. Using high-stakes testing on K-3 is the latter. Ages 5, 6, and 7 are a magical and transformational time. Minds and bodies of our young children develop at such a rapid pace. Some days they seem like wise old sages capable of grasping the most complex concepts, while only minutes later a misplaced toy can trigger a loud reminder that they are still children. At last month's work session, Dr. Register mentioned that small children have difficulties coloring in the circles. That is the least of our problems with testing. The primary problem is that developmentally they are incapable, for the most part, of grasping the concept of testing. When children can't grasp a concept, it can easily lead to fear and anxiety. That's what transpired in classrooms all across MNPS this past spring. We all know the stories, and the mention of them have evoked nervous laughter among administrators and anger among parents. We are creating fear and anxiety in children and running the risk of labeling them at a very time when we should expose them to the beauty and endless possibilities of education. An opportunity to inspire is being missed. On a personal note, my daughter is 4. She will go to either Tusculum or Wistit next year. Right now, she's crazy about learning to read. She wants to do it so bad she can taste it. Will she be reading next month? Next year? I don't know. I do know that when she's ready to read developmentally, she will read. I do know that her mother and I won't need a mandated test to let us know when she's ready. We will have faith in and communicate with the professionals that MNPS has hired to teach her. What I also know is that my daughter is highly susceptible to criticism and praise right now. She struggles to avoid one and strives to earn the other. Well, this may be a good thing. Developmentally, she is not capable of managing the emotions that come with these pursuits. Oftentimes, the feelings become overwhelming and lead to a shutdown. Place her in a situation like the ones created this spring, and the outcome is pretty predictable. My wife and I believe that learning is a lifelong endeavor. Learning is at the core of life and a pursuit not just for an achievable goal, but because it is an essential ingredient of a balanced life. We continually attempt to demonstrate the joy and wonder that comes from being a lifelong learner. I will not sacrifice my family's passion for lifelong learning simply to create more data points. In closing, I know that as technology has grown, it has given us more and more opportunities to capture data that can potentially aid us in our tasks. But we must never become so dependent on data that we lose sight of the fact that each data point is a wonderful, living, breathing child with very real, incalculable passions, triumphs, and challenges. We must use data to fit children and not make our children fit data. If we are not careful, the business of MNPS will become the business of collecting data and not what we need to be accountable for, the educating of children. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Corinne Havron?
My name is Corrine Havren, and I am the parent of 2 children. My daughter, Gabriella, is a rising 2nd grader, and my son, Seamus, will attend kindergarten in the fall. My children both attend Hull-Jackson Montessori Magnet School. Our decision about where to send our kids to school was one that we did not take lightly. My husband and I both attended public schools, and we wanted our children to have a public school experience as well, but we thought our daughter wouldn't excel in a traditional public school setting. After touring several of Metro's choice schools and enduring the school lottery process, we selected Hull-Jackson. Generally, we have been pleased with the instruction our children have received while at this school. There are many wonderful Montessori-trained teachers at this school, and we love the focus on fine arts, which includes a fantastic strings program. There are many times, however, that I feel this school is a wolf masquerading in sheep's clothing. Why is that, you might ask? Well, the school is unable to function as a true Montessori school due to the high-stakes standardized testing that is mandated at both the local and state level. The effect on our school is that an inordinate amount of time ends up being spent on test preparation. A school like Hull-Jackson is at a unique disadvantage because many of the children are in a function at a high rate of poverty, but it also has to test children using a format they are unfamiliar with. If you have ever toured a Montessori classroom, you will see things like bead chains and a movable alphabet. These are hallmarks of Montessori teaching. I am convinced that the children at Hull-Jackson Montessori know much more than the traditional fill-in-the-blanks bubble test could ever capture, but we aren't asking them in a script that they understand. What is scary to me as a parent is that so much is riding on these test scores, including teacher salaries and school funding. Each year, this school looks less and less like a Montessori school as more government-imposed curriculum, standards, and testing are introduced. This past year happened to be the first year that children in kindergarten through 2nd grade participated in a standardized test. As you know, the SAT-10 was administered throughout our elementary schools. In the fall, my daughter, who was 6 at the time, endured 3 hours of testing on the first day and 2 to 3 hours on the 2nd and 3rd days. Her scores didn't provide us with any meaningful information, although as parents we were told by the district that this test would determine academic performance and help shape decision-making for our children. In the spring, we actually refused standardized testing, believing the stress was actually causing more harm than good was to come from allowing her to participate. As evidenced by the other parents here this evening, I know that I don't stand alone.
Rochelle Dehard. Going once, going twice. Gone. Next, we will move on to governance issues. Ms. Shepherd.
The consent agenda is as follows. 1A, approval of minutes, 5/14/13 regular meeting. B, recommended award of contract for Rose Park Middle School renovations, Messer Construction Company, MBO 12-021. C, recommended award of contract for Norman Binkley Elementary School additions and renovations, Orion Building Corporation, MBOE 12-011. D, recommended award of contract for Joelton Middle School renovations, demolition work, modern day wrecking, MBOE 13-008. E, change order number 5 for asbestos abatement services, Levi Industrial Contractors, Inc., M-477. F, change order number 1 for district-wide maintenance, repairs, and general contracting, security vestibules for Lakeview, Glen, Tom Joy, and Joelton Elementary Schools, Carrie G. Campbell, Inc., M-433. G, designer supplement number 1 for all of our middle schools additions and renovations, Jack Freeman and Associates, PC, L-2854. H, designer supplement number 3 for Hermitage Elementary School additions and renovations, Gobble Hayes Partners, Inc., L-2428. I, recommended approval of Antioch High School Alumni Association's request to use the old maintenance building at Antioch Middle School. J, recommended approval of lease amendment for Lipscomb University's use of space in the Stokes Building. K, recommended approval of lease amendment for Nashville Public Education Foundation's use of the space at the Martin Professional Development Center. L, awarding of bids and contracts. 1, Annenberg Institute for Reform at Brown University. 2, Battelle for Kids. 3, Buck Institution for Education. 4, Catapult Learning, LLC. 5, Group Dynamics. 6, Carmen and Company, Inc. 7, KIP Nashville. 8, Lipscomb University College of Education. 9, Midstate Catering. 10, Mobile Fixtures, Inc. 11, Rutherford Learning Group, Inc. And 12, Web Associates. M, recommended approval of 2012-2013 operating budget amendment number 2. N, recommended approval of request for compulsory attendance waiver. O, recommended approval of reduction in force CEET Arts and Communications position at McGavick High School and A+ lab position at Antioch High School. And P, recommended approval of 2013-14 Student Code of Conduct. Madam Chair, I recommend that the consent agenda be approved as read.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to the Finance Committee reports. Mr. Pinkston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Immediately prior to this full board meeting, the Budget Committee, which is a committee of the whole, met and reviewed and discussed and ultimately approved the revised fiscal year 2013-14 operating budget for Metro Nashville Public Schools. From when we have previously approved the budget earlier in the spring, since then we've made several adjustments, and the total proposed operating budget for the 2013-14 fiscal year is now $746 million, 400 and change, I should say, and that represents about a 3.6% increase over our current operating budget. We do feel that this is a responsible, balanced budget that serves the needs of Metro Nashville Public School students, and with that, I would like to move approval of the revised 2013-14 MNPS operating budget.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next, Dr. Register, discussion on the April 2014-2015 district calendar.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I would like to say at the outset that it would be my recommendation not to approve a calendar for the 2014-2015 school year at this meeting, but I would like to introduce this as a discussion item and recommend that we consider a final adoption of a calendar by August of this year if we're ready to do so. I'll say this, and as a word of explanation, I've been superintendent of 4 school systems now since the late 80s, and the calendar approval process here is much earlier than in any other system where I've been. We're really talking about the calendar for school year 2014, year after next, at this point in time. That works okay to approve it that far in advance if you aren't recommending any changes, or if you aren't considering changes to a calendar. If it's approval of a traditional calendar or a continuation of the process that we've been going through, the calendar that we've been following in the past, it's okay to do it that far in advance. It really makes it very awkward to do so, though, when we are at a place in time that we are this year with our calendar, because this year we adopted a balanced calendar. We've had a number of questions from board members. Mr. Hayes most recently asked a number of questions about the analysis of how we did this year. How did the balanced calendar work? This is our first year for doing that, and we can't answer all of those questions now. You know, we're still gathering data on this year, still doing a lot of research on the impact of that, and we've had a number of questions and a number of challenges come up about the balanced calendar this first year. Namely, one that I'll mention that Mr. Majors was tasked with this challenge of creating intercessions soon after he came to the central office, and with the expectation that we'd have a great deal of federal money to apply to this. And we, as you know, federal funds were reduced not too long after we approved our budget this year. So we've really been stretched to find adequate resources to do some of the things that we had planned to do and that we had talked about doing in intercession. So as we go forward, as we go through the summer, we want to take time to really consider a number of issues this year and be able to present findings and recommendations to you before we ask you to consider, or before we make a recommendation on the calendar for the 2014 school year. And let me point out just a couple of things that we're still looking at. Intercession is really only one piece of a balanced calendar. Other issues that we've addressed in the first discussion of this was the opportunity to stretch the calendar out to reduce a summer vacation or the time out of school, which we think is a plus for economically disadvantaged children who don't have summer learning opportunities, and the longer they're away from the school, the more regression there is. That's certainly a proven factor with English learner students, but we don't have that data yet to really know whether there was an impact or whether we could see a difference in this first year. And I will say that it's probably very premature to assume that we can draw those conclusions this year. As you know, we do have a balanced calendar that's approved for next year. So this, we'll have another year's worth of data as we go on. We can't really wait that long to approve it, but that's one factor. Another factor that we want to analyze is what's been the impact on attendance in our school system. Has it improved attendance? In some places, there's good data that shows that a balanced calendar can improve attendance. Have we changed the number of suspensions and discipline problems and expulsions as a result of breaks in the fall and breaks in the spring? So we really want to spend a good bit of time looking at that. I've asked Ms. Libby to really look at ways to gather data from teachers, from parents, from others over the course of the summer, and we certainly want to do that before we make recommendations for the 2014-15 school year. I really appreciate the comments made by parents tonight about the stress on testing, and the 2014-15 school year is the year that we will implement the PARCC assessment. And I will say to the parents who are still here, that is a state mandated test. And there's been some concern expressed about having a 2-week intercession before testing begins if we don't have a high rate of attendance at intercession time. This year, I think our total number was about 7,500 students. Tony, is that correct? About, maybe not, 7,500, give or take, a few students who actually attended intercession. That's not as high a percentage as we'd like to see. And I think a lot of that was caused by the fact that we could not advertise transportation for all of our students in those intercessions. So you have been presented with 3 calendar options, 3 drafts, if you will. I'll speak to those very briefly. The first one is a calendar that essentially continues the approach that we're using now: a 2-week fall break, a 2-week spring break, and one week of that fall break and 1 week of that spring break. And I'm not saying this precisely correctly, but 1 week of that would be available for intercession time. And you can see the beginning date is around August the 1st, with a concluding date the last week in May. Draft 2 is one that is an optional calendar that, bottom line, I really support, but it's got a price tag. That's to add 9 days to the calendar, nine days where teachers are employed, and 5 additional instructional days for students. That takes us to a full 180 days in our calendar, which is an extension of time for every student in our school system. But as I said, that carries a pretty big price tag, and I keep questioning Chris Henson about the amount, but we're in the $18 to $20 million range to add 9 days to the school year. Question?
Hold on. I'm playing with my toy. Now you can go.
Okay.
Just a quick question relative to that and where we are in today's universe with the state. A couple of years ago, we had a collective bargaining agreement. We're no longer bound by the collective bargaining agreement. We have a memorandum, I guess, an employee handbook. We do have the ability and authority to increase work days without increasing salary. Is that accurate? Maybe.
Yes, but I would not recommend that.
You wouldn't recommend it, but we do have that capacity.
I would think so.
Right. I mean, if I have a job to get done in my job, I don't get a raise for doing it. I have to do it no matter how much time it takes.
Teachers' salaries are based on days they are employed. They have a work year, and I have not looked specifically at your question, but what I propose to do is to hesitate and see and to give you to give you an accurate answer on your question. I'll be glad to do that.
Yeah, it just to the extent the laws have been fluid in the last 3 or 4 years, I'm just curious specifically.
So, Chris, do you know the answer to that, or Fred?
I don't think that there's a requirement to, and there is no collective bargaining agreement, so
Right,
I think
right.
the employer.
It would really be based on state law, I believe, and one of the considerations is we'd have to look at the requirement that the state law that would require that teachers not take pay cuts on. Is that correct? Can we apply pay cuts now?
I don't know.
Okay, we need to give you an answer on that. Sorry for not being able to respond to that now, but
Quite all right.
question that we can respond to very, very quickly, I think. Calendar 3, the draft 3 is one that frankly I wouldn't recommend, and that's having a 2-week fall break and a 2-week spring break without an intercession. So I'll stop talking now and ask for discussion from the board members and say that I have been quite uncomfortable with this process, and what I've asked our calendar committee to do. Meredith Libby and Larry Collier are the technicians that put this together, and Larry's in the back of the room there on crutches, I think. Larry, you might want to come on up to the podium, if you will, and he didn't injure his leg working on the calendar, but still has a smile on his face. But we'll be glad to answer any technical questions you have about the calendar, and understand that I would recommend that we wait at least until the first meeting in August, so that over the course of the summer, the work sessions, we have an opportunity to fully discuss this and the implications for the 2014-15 school year.
Any questions? Ms. Shepherd?
I'm with Dr. Register on calendar number 2, even though I know it comes with a price tag. My question pertains to the intercession and spring break dates. I know that the state sets the dates for ACT testing, and so are we able to schedule intercession/spring break after the testing or before the testing? I mean, I know that was one of the issues that was discussed at the retreat that I attended, and teachers understandably fret when the children are out for 2 weeks and then come back and immediately they have to do, testing.
First of all, we don't have a test schedule from the
Okay.
State Department for
That was
that,
my-
for the spring of 2015. Easter Sunday is April 5th, so what we did in all 3 of these calendars is to incorporate Friday, April 3rd in with the spring break. in order to complete the school year by the end of May. That makes the third quarter long, but if we have a lot of inclement weather days, they will mostly occur in the third quarter. Someone on the committee made the point that there is testing going on in February for some grade level, and I forget what that is. Is it the writing test?
Dr. Changus is in the room, I believe. Paul, are you still here?
There is a writing assessment.
And
the answer for the microphone was that it is a writing assessment in February. It's a state required writing assessment.
3 or 4 years ago, when we had a lot of snow days, the completion of those writing assessments was problematic. Students were out so much, so we really cushioned the third quarter to give them more time.
I think, practically speaking, postponing spring break pass testing is not practical because the testing window typically falls later now than it did. Paul, I'm looking at you back there, but it's almost the 1st of May, isn't it?
Late April, 1st of May.
So practically speaking, a break after that is right at the end of the school year.
We would hope that the state would not schedule testing right after Easter Sunday because a lot of districts would be spending their spring break at that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm pushing the right button.
Does green mean that we're just powered or that we?
It's you're powered, but you are on. I have the power here.
Fantastic. At some point later this evening, my colleague Will Pinkston will bring a resolution before the board that sets goals around academic achievement for the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm curious, as we look at a 180-day calendar as an idea, if we were to implement 180 days or 185 or 190 days, what might we expect? I'm not, I know he developed the resolution in close collaboration with the administration and certainly pushed hard to say, what do you think you can do? I'm, as you've heard me say many times, wish that we could push the throttle down further, harder, and move faster than getting 50% of our students to a 21, which is historically has been our vision of one of the scores, right, for an ACT to be career and college ready. 5 years to get to 50% of our students meeting our goal is too slow to me, personally. So I wonder what's 180 days, what's 185 days doing, and could we expect more? If the board set, for example, the goal of 70% to 21 in 5 years, what's it take to get there?
So I think the only way, the honest answer I can give you is that I believe very strongly that time has a positive impact. Time's a variable that we don't use very well, and I think, in fact, in the state of Tennessee, we cheat a lot of our kids out of time by banking time, but then shortening the number of days a year that they go to school. And the number of days that teachers have to work and to prepare to teach. So adding 5 professional development days for teachers, 4 professional development days for teachers will have a positive impact. Adding 5 instructional days for students will have a positive impact on over 80,000 children. I think the best way I can say that is I think it will help us meet our goals.
Under the new accountability guidelines, there are a lot of things that are changing with how our teachers are being held accountable for performance. If we don't move to 180 days or more, do we face problems with our teachers being able to retain their jobs based on the way the law has changed in the accountability structure. Right, so we're a year or 2 years now into this new structure, and in a year or so, we're going to have, I don't know how many, you said earlier, I think there's a certain number of teachers that's more than maybe we historically have released for not having high performance. If that trend continues and we are short on meeting the goals, if we don't, and my question is, if we don't go to 180, if 180 and that additional professional development time is critical, will we have issues with our existing workforce where we almost have to go?
I think a general response to you, the line that you're taking here is, again, what I said earlier. I think time's a variable that we need to use, and increased time for teachers and increased time for students is a positive. That's the idea behind an intercession. We tried to do this year an intercession at very little or no cost. Fact is, it costs us about $2 million a day to operate. So there is a price tag that goes with it, but increasing time is something that we ought to do. We have one of the shorter school years in the world of the developed nations, the successful nations, and many countries around the world have significantly more time for their students to go to school. And I think in Tennessee, we cut it short by not giving teachers adequate number of days to prepare and develop. A personal story here, I moved to Tennessee from North Carolina, and and it took me a while to see what was happening when we actually cheated on 180 days. State law says 180 days, but you can add an extra half hour and you can shorten days. And then the bottom line is we usually teach about 174 or 75 days. In North Carolina, the state law mandated 184 days of school. The difference is 10 extra work days for teachers, so they had time to prepare. I think variables like that are really significant and important, and greater time, I believe KIP advertises more time. And I think we need to think about longer time for our students if we want them to be more successful in school. That's not the only variable, though. Quality of teaching, quality of support staff, new reading textbooks. You can go down a long list of variables that can improve success in schools.
I think time is one we're certainly going to be discussing over the summer.
Right.
And I hope you do come to the board with all of our legal options,
right,
with what we can do with our staff in the new legislative environment.
Absolutely. The other side of that is that what we did this year, we were this last year, and thanks for a good tax increase, we were able to make some modifications in raising beginning teacher salary. We ranked 36 in the state before this year. Now I think our rank is about third. I'm worried about slippage there because we're only able to do a minimum state mandated pay raise this year. So I don't know where we'll be next year, but I know that we want the best salaries for the best teachers, and those two go together. So I don't think that adding time without compensation is a very attractive model. That's why it's $2 million a day.
Well, and I guess where I was going with part of that is if they don't have enough time to do their job, they won't have a job, right? I mean, eventually, 2 or 3 years down the line, if they don't have enough time to move the children ahead through the new accountability structure, they'll be out of a job. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that our teacher, we have a very strong workforce in some places. I think that our teachers are underpaid. I wish we could pay them a lot more. I have tremendous respect for the staff, but we've got to make progress. And if one way to do that is to add time, I'm interested in how we can do it in a, tight budget environment, which I think we're going to have for the foreseeable future.
Any other questions? And Ms. Spearing?
I was just thinking about all the factors that are involved in a balanced calendar. And one, from my perspective, is that we give parents options about when to take vacations with their children. We certainly don't want parents to pull their kids out of school if we can help it. And the fact that we're no longer in an agricultural society, we have options where parents can take a vacation in the spring or in the fall, and I think this is really important to our community. A few years ago, I visited Norway and Sweden, and there they had a community where they had a 4-day work week because they valued so much the opportunity for kids to spend time with their families. So I think this is an important attribute of our balanced calendar. I think you hit the hammer on the nail when you said the big issue is the intercession. And it feels like our intercession this year was not productive. And even though we were spending $2 million a day, I don't know if it was funded to the level. I feel like it wasn't funded to the level where we could have meaningful results. So if we're going to, then my next question is, what is the purpose of the intercession? Is the purpose of the intercession to close the gap? Is the purpose of the intercession to give all children more opportunities to do things that they don't normally have the opportunity for, to expand their experiences? So with that in mind, I do like the idea of the additional 9 days where everybody gets it. There's transportation provided. Hopefully teachers are compensated. I know teachers are working very hard, extremely hard, and I would appreciate seeing them compensated. So
I think it would. I think the fact that if we had a longer school year and longer days for teachers, I think that would be a real attractor to a number of teachers. I do want to clarify one point, if I may. The $2 million a day is the cost for operating full school. It is the transportation cost and the staffing cost for regular days of operation. When you just think about school operation, the budget that we had for intercessions this year was much smaller than that. Mr. Majors, $801,000 for the entire school year. So we really were underfunded there. Mr. Carr helped us out as much as he could with transportation, but that came out of the regular transportation budget to provide some transportation for a number of children when principals requested it.
was that second intercession?
Yes.
We had
First and second.
Oh, first and second, there was some transportation provided.
Yes.
Is that right?
Mostly second.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we increased the number then with the second intercession?
Yes, we had several schools that wrote me a lot of thank you notes. Lately in particular, we had transportation there. We got kids there that couldn't come to the first intercession.
Our average daily attendance for fall intercession was at 3,489 students. Our average daily attendance for spring intercession was 6,149 students, primarily as a result of Mr. Carr providing transportation to the individual schools and for special projects.
And we're still well below 10%.
Absolutely.
So I question is this money even worth it if we're not going to fund it to a larger degree? And if the purpose is to raise the achievement gap or to close the achievement gap and to raise the achievement of all students, then maybe this is not the way to do it. Maybe we should focus more on after-school activities if we want to expand the curriculum, provide more opportunities for interventions on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, rather than a couple of weeks during the year.
And also to isolate, I think you have to isolate that one piece of the balanced calendar, the intercession piece, from other advantages that may exist in the balanced calendar when you spread the school year out.
Any other questions?
Just touching off a lot of the comments that have been made, I was sort of wondering if we can have targeted interventions with regard to the school calendar or intercession. Because you mentioned KIPP, some of these schools that are serving specific populations can sort of cater to the needs of that population. Are we able to piecemeal school hours, for example, or give schools autonomy to set hours? Does it have to be a...
There are opportunities for before or after school interventions now. The budget's limited though. That money for supplemental educational services was a big piece of the federal budget, the Title I budget. That was cut significantly, and that's really what we intended to use to really fund the intercession at a much higher level than what we were able to do this year. So we still don't know about the sequestration of federal funds and what our federal budget's going to look like for next year, but we're projecting another reduction.
But as far as the calendar goes, we all have to follow the same calendar. There's not a lot of autonomy within the schools as to
We've
what
had
hours
some
they
requests
set.
to modify, but that's when we're so tied together as a system for many things like transportation, and it's very difficult to do a lot of variation. Perfect example is the discussion that we have at least once a year about whether we can start high schools later. And we know that we have a 3-tiered bus system, and buses run for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, and they're all linked together. So the degree of flexibility is pretty limited, but we entertain those questions. In fact, we have a request from the school to consider a variation in the calendar for next year that we haven't considered yet.
And I think with intercession too, we could, if we're very limited on funding, we could try to direct that to the schools that most need, extra help. Which I know we're just sort of offering it across the board right now, but consider.
The basic approach this year was to ask principals to look at their own federal budgets, their Title I budgets, with some supplemented funds, operational funds and other funds from the district spread across the board. But you see a little bit of variation there for real high poverty schools where they might have a little bit more budget, but not to the extent that you could really see a huge difference in level of service provided.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Ms. Kim.
To build on Ms. Frogg's comment, it seems to me that, well, a comment and then a couple questions. So it seems to me just absurd that at the level of the school, they don't have the autonomy to make those kinds of choices, whether to add a day here, whether it's for professional development or for ongoing learning with children. But to all the previous conversations about autonomy, I think this is like where the rubber hits the road. It's like this is where we see it play out. Because my guess is that I'm not against, for example, intercession per se or more days per se. In fact, the notion of time on task is like a tried and true mantra of some of the most successful schools, so I am with you on that. But that also assumes that the quality of teaching and learning is extremely high in the classroom, because if it's not, then more time on that kind of task is not really going to pay off. And so I think there's so much, and you've already noted that of course it's a piece, a pillar of many different things, but I think it all goes up to this notion of autonomy. Do building level leaders have the freedom to make those kinds of choices given the population of their schools and what they're trying to accomplish? This is why I've been such a huge advocate that I don't think charters should be the only ones who have autonomy on this front around budget and time and whatnot, because the needs of schools are so vastly different that trying to manage it as a monolithic entity is just, to the point here, it's just tough. So you're making trade-offs between, okay, it's either this, a couple weeks in intercession or 9 days. Well, I don't know. In some cases, it probably will solve the problem, but in a lot of cases, it won't, and we will have just spent $20 million. And so I think I'm very interested when it pertains to, so I'm getting away from the calendar conversation, but it always, for me, goes back to the fundamental, philosophical approach that we want to take. Because ideally, I would like to empower all of our school leaders to make these kinds of choices, to have the budget to add days for professional development and learning, for teaching, whatever the case may be, and then spend their money accordingly, and then we hold them accountable for results. And I personally think that the kinds of leaders that we would attract into that environment would be extraordinary. That they want to run their own enterprise, they want to be held accountable, they just want the freedom to make the choices based on what's happening on the ground. So, yeah, that's my one comment. Although, all that being said, I do have a question. So one question is, so I have that whole macro point, and I know that discussion is ongoing, but I guess when we think about, so let's say there are trade-offs to Mr. Hayes' point, okay, let's say we have a pot, somehow manna from heaven drops, we have $20 million to spend. It's the only $20 million we have. How do you think about the relative importance of more time on task, like sort of the monolithic move of adding 9 days, versus, let's say, the importance of increasing the quality of teaching and learning in a classroom versus the importance of anything else? Because that's one way that I'd want to think about this one decision, is just, well, it depends. What else would we be trading out, or or could we trade up to something else with likely to have greater impact? My mind goes to that kind of question. So how do you think about the relative significance?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and I think that you can't consider, I think it's a mistake to consider one variable in isolation.
Definitely.
I would like to see quality time extended, and that means improving the quality of teaching in classrooms and providing the professional development necessary in recruiting good teachers. Are they interrelated? I think the answer could very well be yes. If you give teachers 2 extra weeks employment, that's a half a month's salary. That increases pay. From my recommendation would be, yes, that will increase pay. That will make us more attractive to offer a week's more professional development, autonomous professional development, school-based, school-planned, based on school improvement plans for teachers coming on board. So I think they are very definitely interrelated, and I think it's a mistake to consider one option in isolation. And I really couldn't say would that be the best $20 million that we could spend. The best $20 million we could spend may be to adopt a strategic pay plan and apply that $20 million to salaries. But you have to remember how large our salary line item is, and that $20 million is a drop in the bucket when you're talking about $400 million in salaries in the school system a year. So can it make a significant difference on if you look at strategic pay plans? I think in relation to the budget discussion and the approval of the budget that was done earlier, I think one thing that we've talked to our human capital staff about is really working on a strategic salary study. How can we better utilize the several $100 million that we have going into salaries at this time? So I think that's a companion piece to this. Do we need to change our salary structure? Not something to be considered quickly or lightly, but I think as we move past the 1st of July now, we ought to spend the first 6 months of the year looking at strategic compensation plans to improve salaries for teachers if we can, to look at professional development that's based on a continuous improvement model that we're moving toward, implementing the strategic plan, and also the variable of time, which is very important.
Any other questions? Hold on, I've got to get my toy back online. All right, Ms. Baring.
Yes, Dr. Register, you mentioned that there was some desire to have high schools beginning later than 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And we know that the research is very clear that teenagers are not awake at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's that first hour is really a waste of time. And I hear teachers at Hillsborough High School say, the first period is asking kids to pick up their heads because they just can hardly, they're doing the best they can, but they can hardly keep their eyes open. Is there a possibility, even with the demands of this large urban school district, that we could just change high school starting time to switch high school and middle school? So the high school kids would start at 9 and middle school kids would start at 7. Wouldn't the buses work out about as well with just a small?
That's a simple question with a very complicated answer that I'd be well advised not to try to respond to quickly. But if you're talking about a 3-tiered system, conceivably you could put elementary kids first, or middle school kids first, or high school kids first. This district has made a decision that the safest way, the safety for, is to put older children out before daylight in many cases on buses. I think what I would say about transportation and options there is that we've got to look at non-traditional options. And I'm very interested in what Mayor Dean's doing with mass transit in the area. And one model that we really ought to consider is changing the way we transport high school students so that their time's not dependent on elementary students. And we've begun doing a good bit of research. Fred's done a lot of work with Metro Transit Authority and regional transportation people to really look to see if there is a different way to provide transportation for high school students so that they're not all linked together. We have about 650 buses in our school system. And for 2.5 hours a day, every one of them's used. And so there's not, so it is to use an old phrase, it is a tail wagging the dog, the way we presently are organized. And we know, and the other thing I'll say about transportation in this district is with a high percentage of children who live in poverty, who are economically disadvantaged, we have a very high ridership all the way through high school, much higher than anywhere I've been before. Many of our children use transportation, and if you take it away, then we have real significant problems.
Any other questions? Well, I think that it is a very wise decision to move the calendar recommendations to our business meeting in August. So we will go ahead and make that adjustment on the agenda. Next up, Mr. Pinkston.
Do we need to actually have a vote and a deferral? Can we just move it if we don't actually develop it?
We don't. I don't think we need to defer it because we're not voting on anything. We're just discussing. So there's no. I don't think there's any need. So we can just put it back on the calendar in August. Mr. Pinkston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the next item on the calendar or on the agenda is a resolution regarding the board's policy on academic achievement or academic excellence. This resolution that I'm bringing to the board tonight is really the culmination of conversations that we've been having in the boardroom and with management over the past few months. It's a natural extension of the discussions we've been having about the new academic performance framework and our desire to set ambitious but attainable student achievement goals, both in the short term and in the long term. We talked about achievement goals at the May work session a couple of weeks ago and heard from Dr. Changus and his team, and I hope that we're in agreement that the next step is to include some of the goals that we heard that night into our board's academic achievement policy so that we can monitor progress going forward. Just a reminder, is Dr. Changus in the room? Great. Yes. And Dr. Changus, please correct me if I'm getting any of the numbers from your PowerPoint a couple of weeks ago, if I'm doing this wrong, but we currently in MNPS, any given grade or subject are a little over 40% proficient or advanced on the state assessments. That's not good enough. There was a time a few years ago when we were over 80%. Then the state changed the standards. It did the right thing, in my opinion, by raising the bar in the classroom, but the net effect of that was student achievement fell, not just in this district, but all over the state, and we've been, as a state and as a community, clawing back to those higher levels ever since then. So again, a little over 40% right now, and we would like to get back to where we were and better, but do that at the same time as having a higher bar in the classroom. And there are other numbers that we can talk about in discussion, but that was one of the high points from our May work session. Now, given the public comments we heard earlier today, I want to be clear, the resolution I'm bringing references goals for proficiency ratings on the state assessments. It also references goals for student growth, year-over-year gains, which I happen to think are actually more important than absolute proficiency. How much a child improves over the course of the year is perhaps the most important thing we can monitor. So I view these goals as just that, something for us to aim for as an organization, something to work toward, not a mechanism for driving heavy-handed accountability. So with that, this is the first time I brought a resolution. Do I present this verbally and then?
Yes, you will need to read the resolution and we will need to vote on it.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So with that, I am bringing a resolution to establish academic achievement goals for Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. The resolution reads as follows. Whereas the Metropolitan Nashville Board of Public Education, the board, and the management and staff of Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools, MNPS, desire to provide the highest quality education for every child in MNPS. And whereas the board and the management and staff of MNPS, the nation's 42nd largest school system with 81,000 students, recognize the challenges and opportunities of serving one of the most socially, economically, and culturally diverse student populations in America. And whereas after previously struggling, MNPS now is demonstrating steady gains in academic achievement across multiple grades and subjects, thanks to management's leadership and the dedication of MNPS principals, teachers, and especially students. And whereas, in agreement with the board's determination, management and staff have articulated clear and ambitious 5-year goals designed to advance academic achievement and accelerate improvement for all MNPS students. Now, be it therefore resolved, MNPS management and staff shall develop strategies for ensuring that MNPS students exceed annual state-recommended goals for student academic growth. And be it further resolved, MNPS management and staff shall develop strategies for ensuring that upon or before conclusion of the 2017-18 academic year, more than 70% of MNPS students are rated proficient or advanced on the state of Tennessee standardized assessments. And be it further resolved, MNPS management and staff shall develop strategies for ensuring that upon or before conclusion of the 2017-18 academic year, 50% of MNPS high school graduates score 21 or higher on the ACT assessment of college readiness or the equivalent on the SAT assessment. And be it further resolved, the ultimate goal for academic achievement must be to ensure that 100% of MNPS students are prepared for a career or college and life. And be it further resolved, the board's policy on academic achievement shall be revised to reflect the aforementioned goals. So with that, Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that we approve and adopt this resolution.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
I second it.
Give me a second here. I'm working in the blind here. We're all open. Okay. There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Hayes?
Sure. I commend you, Mr. Pinkston, for bringing this motion before the board this evening. I'm curious if you contemplated adding anything in around Common Core. For example, we are going to begin a new testing regimen under Common Core to say another goal should be that we would meet or exceed the national average on Common Core. I know you've been a big advocate for Common Core, and I'm wondering why you didn't want to say we should be at or above the average within a year or 2 years.
I think it is a little premature to have the conversation about where we fall relative to other states until the tests are aligned. As you know, every state administers its own assessment, and it's very different state to state. And most states, including ours, the standardized assessment is actually not fully aligned at the moment with Common Core. And as Dr. Register mentioned earlier, in the 2014-15 year, most of the country will be moving to, if not the same test, then one of two different tests. One is called PARC and the other is called Smarter Balanced. And I think it's going to take a while for that implementation to get deployed around the country. I suspect that by the time we get to 2014-15, there will still be many states and school districts that don't have the technology readiness in place and still haven't fully implemented the assessment. So I think it's a conversation worth having, and I think the first step is to get those assessments in place and see where we are.
Do you have any thoughts around ACT achievement and timeline to greater than 50%? Right, I mean, you've heard me talk about this before. I feel that 50%, if I'm fortunate to be here for a second term, I'll have been on the board for 8 years. And if in my tenure only half of our students are, by our definition, part of which is 21 career and college ready, if only half of our students are meeting that in my 8 years, if I'm here for a second term on the board, I feel like I will have failed. I don't know how my fellow colleagues feel about ACT. For those who would have been here for 8 years, or Dr. Brannon longer, as somebody who's been in the district for a long time as well, if 50% is where you feel we should be, I'm curious how everybody feels about that. 5 years from now, to go from in the 30s to 50 seems like we're not shooting for the moon. You talked about a moonshot in February, and this seems like we've pulled way back from a moonshot, and I'm wondering, where's the moonshot?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with you. 50% is not good enough. That means 50% are not college ready, right? And
we define 21 as career or college ready, right? I mean, they're not ready to work by our definition, and maybe we should change the definition.
Yeah, no, look, I agree that that's not good enough, and that it ultimately needs to be more, a lot more, and I think that ultimately we also have to recognize that this is a pretty stubborn indicator to move. We haven't moved it much over the last couple of years, and that's why in the May work session we had a little bit of a sidebar with Dr. Changas about the need to really develop some intentional strategies around ACT specifically, doing some things different than we already are, and I know that the team is working on that. So I guess I agree with you, but I think realistically, that kind of increase. And Dr. Register, what's the current number exactly right now?
Let me ask Dr. Changas to give an accurate number. Where are we on ACT now, Paul?
As a district, we were at 29% last year. Statewide, it was probably in the 33 to 35% range.
So,
don't go away. I'm sure we'll have more questions.
Yeah. So I concur is the short answer, but I also think we've got to be realistic about where we can get and how fast relative to where we are at the moment.
Yeah, and I have a question. I'm just curious, Mr. Hayes, based on your comments, where do you see us going? Because if this, and I understand what you're saying, if this is not getting us to where you believe we need to be, what is your vision for where we need to be?
I guess my ultimate vision would be that we get to 100%.
And how do we do that?
Well, we set the resolution to push the administration to get there.
Mm-hmm. And
so if we set our vision short, I feel like we failed.
Mm-hmm.
So we would set the vision. We would set the resolution to say, we expect you to get to 100% in X number of years. Tell us how to get there and how can we support you as an administration.
Now,
so back to my question earlier around days and time. I've talked a lot about our teacher quality. What do we need to get there?
That was where I was going with that. What do we need to get to 100%? Now, you talk about days and time, but it's also going to include a pretty large budget to get there. So are we, in our effort to get there, which I think would be fantastic, I would love to see 100%, but in our effort to get there, are we putting the cart before the horse and considering a resolution, and, you know, not to say that this is not one that will pass, but in considering a resolution that says 100% by 5 to 7 years, we make that part of the district's objective. We make them accountable to get to that goal. Are we willing as a board then to back that up when they come back to the board and say, here's what you said you wanted, this is how we're going to do it. So now you got to figure out, you know, how we're going to get there. This is our strategic plan for getting there. Where do we get the funding from?
If we're even required to spend more dollars.
But we may be.
We don't know.
Yeah, and that's just the thing.
So back to setting the vision, my goal would be to set a vision, and I agree about being reasonable. When Dr. Register, when you spoke at the Chamber of Commerce Report Card Committee, your second day on the job, you said it would take 7 to 8 years to move. This would be 8 years.
Well, let me respond in a different way. A decade ago, there were long-range goals, or over a decade ago now, there were long-range goals set by No Child Left Behind that would reach us to 100% proficient and advanced. I dare say there's not a school system in this country over that decade that attained that standard. I will not point to a single child in this district for whom I would have set a low expectation of not having a 21 on an ACT. And I mean that. But at the same time, these are aspirational and aggressive goals. They are attainable, and I think, but aspirational. I think it's a real stretch to get there, and that means that they're meaningful goals. No Child Left Behind in the last 5 years of its existence was meaningless in terms of the goals that were set. And so I think we need to set aspirational goals that are aggressive and meaningful, but I don't think we need to be unrealistic, not in our expectations for individual children, but in expectations for huge populations of children.
And I think that's where I get back to, and I'll let you comment in a second, that's where I get back to. I agree that we need to do whatever we can to get our children to the highest level of achievement, but we need to be realistic about it. We have not historically moved I guess the line for achievement very quickly, very often. And now we're thinking that maybe we should move it much quicker, much higher, much faster. Now you have to look at that as far as we're adults sitting here making the decisions about children who are taking these tests or doing the work in the school. Be very careful that you don't overstep those boundaries and what our children can actually achieve. I think we have some of the smartest children in the world right here in our district. I'm a little biased, but that's okay. I think our children are the smartest. But we need to be very careful in not setting a goal that is unattainable for our children, then getting to that point and saying, look, we failed again. So I think we need to be very realistic, whatever the goals are that we set, on where we're going with our kids.
And I guess a part of that could also be, okay, it's 5 years to get 17, 18, right? I'm sorry, it's 5 years to get to 21. I was looking at 17, 18 here. It's 5 years to get to 21, but what's 5 years after that? And I feel if we don't set a higher goal, that we're selling ourselves short. And particularly when we think about, you know, your board tenure, if you're 4 years, and if you happen to run again, and you're here for 8, would that move to 50% be acceptable to you? And I'm saying for me, I think in 8 years, it's not. I'd like to see something faster personally. And I think it could be achieved, and I think that the legislative environment has changed. I'm delighted with the work that you did with Governor Bredeson's office to set higher expectations and standards and goals. I mean, those were Herculean tasks that you guys did to change what happened in the state of Tennessee, and I applaud you for it. But I still want to get there faster than we are.
Okay. Ms. Shepherd?
Well, and to everyone's point about being realistic, I think we have to realize and remember that Tennessee is one of 9 states that requires all students to test on the ACT. And, you know, sometimes that can skew the results.
Any other discussion?
I'm sorry, Ms. Breen.
I will add a comment. You know, education is the only field that expects 100%. I mean, no medical board would say we want 100% of our patients. No one's ever allowed to die. We must cure. I mean, they won't set those kind of goals in the medical field, but we do that in education. And I believe that every child can learn, and I believe that we have the responsibility to take every child as far as we possibly can. And I think part of that has, that there is no one way to do it, that we're constantly thinking and rethinking and learning as educators. So I don't know what the answer is. I understand what you're saying, Michael, and I think that what you're saying is I want every child to make progress. I want every child to have the opportunities that some of our kids have. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a different way to say it. Maybe it's just, you know, difficult to, you know, put a number around it.
And I look at it as through all the years, the ACT has been static, right? I mean, and maybe the test has changed a little bit, but we've gone through Common Core, we've gone through all sorts of different standards and expectations. But that end test, if we want to say that that's kind of one of the end tests, that's an indicator of how we've done, that one really hadn't, you know, right? They may have changed some of the vocabulary in the questions or types of questions, but it hadn't changed. And if we say that that's our expectation of being career and college ready, and that's our vision, that every student graduates career and college ready, and that's part of that definition, then only saying 50% of our students get there in 5 years, to me, means that we're selling ourselves short and we're setting our goal too low.
And I think we would be remiss if we continue and to look at this as though it is just the achievement is tied strictly to this district. There are a lot of other factors that go into achievement. One of the things that, you know, in our last work session we talked about is social emotional learning. We've got to understand that we've got to look at the whole child and how every single child learns. And that ties directly into academic achievement as well. So I think there are a lot of factors, and to Ms. Spearing's point, how do we get there? What do we do? What's realistic? You know, it's a very big undertaking. And I think I would celebrate today if we could say, sitting here today, that in 5 years we're going to be at 100%. I would throw a party for everybody in this room. And I would love for us to get there. But again, I'll go back to let's be realistic about it, because we don't want to set the goals at this level so high for students who have to make the grade, who have to achieve the goals. We could sit here all day long and say, I think every single person in this room should get 100%. And if these are all students, then that's great. But then you've got to consider how each individual is going to progress academically. So, I mean, it's a big undertaking, and I think it's great, but let's be very mindful of how we try to achieve that goal.
And a part of it could be, for me at least, and I said this a year ago when Dr. Changa said 20 years to math proficiency. Now that's been revised, and I'm thrilled it's been revised. But why can't we promise every first grader that enters today? So maybe it's 12 years to 100%, 13 years to 100%, but some goal that says in X number of years, 90%. But half of our graduates is, to me, unacceptable. Now, I'm going to vote for it because I appreciate the effort, and I'm going to try to amend it next year. This is a great start, but I hope we can push ourselves further and set the goal higher to try to say we want to get to something greater than half of our students.
Mr. Frankston.
Yeah, and again, I mean, ACT is the most stubborn indicator to move because it's the accumulation of an academic career's worth of knowledge, in theory, right? So I'm with you. I agree. I think the first step is to get some intentional ACT strategies in place, and this resolution along with the collaborative conversations that have happened up till now, kind of gets that ball rolling. But I want to kind of go back to the top part of the resolution, which is ensuring that students are exceeding annual state recommended goals for student academic growth. And some of the modeling that Dr. Changus has done, I mean, we're coming, if we're successful in this, we'll come close to almost doubling state recommended goals year over year. I want to see the end result on ACT, as badly as you do, improve. But I also want to see those year over year growth goals accelerated. Ultimate and absolute proficiency is important, but moving a child from a C to a B and better year over year is equally important. So if we can really kind of double down the focus on student growth in addition to doing all these other things, I think we've done a great thing.
Just one more comment. And I think that we want to keep in mind that success is a lot more than a number. An ACT score. Success is the whole child. Success is, there was a documentary the other day on from TED about what does it take to be a good teacher. And it's not a score on a test. What they said was the missing piece was grit, determination, that no child in my room is going to fail. How do you quantify that? I think there's much more than just a number on a test. So I think we can be open to that.
And you're correct about that, because I can tell you, I know from personal experience, I know students who have exceeded a 21 on the ACT who have not done well after high school, and students who have gotten lower grades who have gone on to do greater things. So I agree with you. Let's just be very mindful of putting numbers to linking the numbers to overall success in the future. So any other discussion? Alrighty, I think that was pretty. Ms. Kim, go right ahead. You're right ahead.
I have
almost missed it.
I have one question about, it's an interesting debate, and I actually am in two minds. I can argue both sides. But my big question is, the power of an ambitious goal to me is to drive meaningfully different action, thinking, mindsets, discipline, management, everything. And so that's the question is, maybe Dr. Register, you can answer, when you think about this set of goals, do you stare at it and say, yeah, we'd have to have a radical retooling of a lot of things, because that's what I want to see, because I think what you're getting at is simply, what's going to shove us out of the box of the current way of doing it, because, the ACT's been around since 1959. I don't know how long it's been around in Tennessee, but you're right to the point of realism and ambition. It's a tough sector when it hasn't moved at all in decades. And so even what we have on paper right now is just radical in light of that history. And it would require radical change. And that I'm excited about. If that number causes us to think in a very different way about how we do business and the care with which we sort of approach everything, because right now it's not as though we don't have a lot of good things happening. It'd be different if it was we've got hardworking people, we've got a lot of good things going, and yet we have the results that we have now. So to reach that next tranche of growth or that next milestone, it's just going to take something truly big.
Short answer or response, if I may. We've taken longer than we expected to take in coming up with these goals. And the reason we've done that is that we've been very thoughtful about the process and looking at what at the implications for these goals. The next thing that you'll see is a rollout of a draft strategic plan, which will, and you've seen part of that. You've seen the goal part, the aspirational part of that, but you've not seen the strategic action plans that go with that we're developing now, and that will be discussed over the course of the summer.
Yes. We're looking forward to that.
And all of it's got to be tied together.
Any other discussion? All right, that motion's been made and properly second. All in favor of adopting the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. It is adopted. Thank you, Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Madam
We will
Chair.
move right into the director's report. Dr. Register.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got one item on the director's report tonight that will help us attain our goals. And I want to recognize Dr. Keisha Ray, and I'll ask her to introduce other people who will be part of the presentation on the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools Learning Technology Plan. Keisha?
Excellent. Let me see. Don't laugh out there. Okay. All right, thank you very much. We've got some things that we're passing out, and while they're being passed out, this is Catherine McRoy. She is a member of the Nashville Technology Council. She's a principal with C3 Consulting, and she's on the executive committee of Nashville Technology Council. And her work with the Nashville Technology Council Education Committee is the impetus for this planning process that started a little bit over a year ago. And so you are receiving a PowerPoint that we're going over so that we can be sure that you can see everything. And then a summary document that is the learning technology plan that we have prepared. I'll wait until everybody gets theirs. All right, there we are. So the premise of our plan is to provide access to and purposeful use of technology. It's essential to the development of knowledge, skills, and character necessary to learn, work, and live in an increasingly complex and information-rich society. So this plan is designed to take our students from where they are today to where they need to be in the world that they live in, that you and I live in today. And Catherine and I are going to kind of play tag on the presentation. She's going to start, and then I'm going to come back and provide some details. So, yeah.
Right. So the idea behind this plan is that we will leverage technology to increase the ability for kids to learn. It's a tool. That's all it is. It's not replacing any other program. It's another tool to be leveraged. Because the information that's available today in the world is all over the place. It's not just in books that you get or textbooks that you get. So children need to learn how to search for information and interpret and analyze what they find in other places outside the school walls, and then be able to respond, write, and create. And it's a way to engage children, and when you engage children, as you know, it helps them be more interested in learning and doing and creating. And it is, again, technology is a tool to do that. So the plan revolves around that basic theme. We are looking for a culture shift in the way we teach that understands that it is an essential tool, and it does enable learning to be personalized and empowers individualized student success. It leverages what the teacher can do because the student can continue on learning with other resources beyond the teacher and in time outside the school time. On the next slide, I wanted to let you know that we engaged stakeholders from all around the community. We included students and parents. We had people from higher education. We had all of our community organizations that already support the schools. And we went to all kinds of every different part of the school system to engage every stakeholder. So if you wonder if anyone was left out, I don't think so. We really took, and this was not just let's hold a few focus groups. There were 3 committees that met every month, and several of them did a lot of work. So it was pulling together cross-functional teams within the system and outside the system. I mean, we had students who got out of school and came, and we had teachers who made time to come, and principals who made time to come. So this is very important to a lot of people.
Okay, so at the very beginning of this process, we also visited school districts that we believe are doing it right. And not only do we believe it, but they've been recognized as doing it right. Henrico County is one of those districts. I had the opportunity last week to visit Mooresville, North Carolina, with President Obama. And one of the things that he noted in the presentation as we were visiting the children was every school should be just like this. Every school in the country should be just like this school. It's Mooresville Middle School. And in that school, every student has a device that they're able to take home. The teachers are engaging the students in interactive, engaging instruction with technology. Now, it's not like Catherine said, it's a tool. So it's not that the technology is driving everything, but it's something that the teachers are using every single day for their instruction and to provide practice for students. So this plan is designed to take what Mooresville has done to scale. And that's the big challenge that a lot of large districts like us have, is how do you think through the process of making this kind of instruction available and these kinds of devices available to students in a district our size. So we've kind of narrowed it down to 3 goals, 3 very critical goals that are aligned to Common Core and prepare us for the PARC, which is the assessment that our students will be taking. One is transforming teaching and learning. That involves looking at curriculum, professional learning, instruction, human capital, the teachers that we're hiring, making sure that they have a skill set that can carry this off, student assessment, and the school district owning the transformation of teaching and learning. It also, another goal is redesigning learning environments. So learning environments don't need to look in this plan like they may look today, straight rows and desks. We want technology infrastructure to be robust, for students to have access in all of their classrooms. It'll be school-based support for that technology in their schools and for the professional learning around that technology use in their schools and buildings. And then facilities to be designed to manage this kind of transformation. And then building and sustaining community leadership and support. And that's the business and community partnerships, working with the Nashville Technology Council and other businesses in the city that are really going to be the beneficiaries of our students' knowledge when they graduate from high school and have the high skill set that they need to take on the positions that are already opened in these companies. And then marketing communication of what we're doing in our district with this plan. So the strategies to accomplish this goal, many are underway already. It extends the access. These goals and these strategies will extend our students' access to content beyond the school day. So in your earlier conversation, you were thinking, well, how can we be strategic about after school? This is one of the ways that we can be strategic about that. It allows the students to take content home, to take instruction home, and they work at their time, their pace, and their place. Again, Common Core line, PARC readiness is fully embedded into everything that we've done. For transforming teaching and learning, that means blended learning, where pieces of instruction are delivered digitally. Project-based learning, where rigorous projects that are designed by students incorporate 21st century skills. Devices at desks and in classrooms rather than in computer labs. So rather than having a class period or one day for an elementary school that they may rotate through and have access to that technology, they would have it in their classrooms and at their disposal all day, every day. And then technology-rich instruction in all classrooms. For redesigning learning environments, our strategies are to have flexible learning environments. We're moving to more tables and desks with chairs so that kids can move around and get in groups, small groups, large groups, or have individual space. Again, devices available for every student, and then Wi-Fi available in every classroom. And that will actually be achieved in January of this year. And then building and sustaining community leadership and support, partnerships with business and community, again, and accountability to the stakeholders. We want to be held accountable to this plan. We want to have dashboards that we report out and show how far we've met the metrics that Catherine is going to go over within a minute. Technology, the use of technology is very intuitive for children, but it's not innate. They still have to learn the proper way to use technology and the proper way to navigate the world that is so full of technology today.
The key metrics on page 7 are basically, and I'll bring up the goals for these. This is the goal at the end of 3 years. So this plan is a 3-year plan. We've just finished year 0, basically, in 2013. And we have 14, 15, and 16. So we came up with these measures on each one of those areas. So in professional learning, instructional technology teacher training, we want to be sure that the teachers and then the librarians have all been trained, because it's so important. What's happened over the last 10 years, which needed to happen, was a lot of effort on getting hardware out to the schools. But there was not a lot of effort in helping the teachers use it and to be trained. So this professional learning is really important. And then once they've learned it, are they actually using it in their instruction? So look at which courses are incorporating the blended learning. And we felt like 75%, and we have goals at lower, middle, and high school. The detail plan has all these more detailed goals. On human capital, when we hire teachers, and those teachers we have, we want them all to be able to pass the technology literacy assessment test that has been created. And then we are going to start giving this technology literacy assessment to 8th graders. And we want to be sure that they all take it and that they all pass it. Because by the time they get to high school, they need to have a basic understanding of the technology tools. On technology and infrastructure, the 2016 goal is to have one-to-one student to device and to have Wi-Fi at every school. And we also, what's critical is you've got to have support for this. You can't throw all this at the teachers and then something's wrong with the hardware and they have to fix it. So it's school-based support. We need tech support per device, ratio 1 to 1,000, and we need a tech lead per school. We need 100%. The Nashville Technology Council and the Academies of Nashville have really worked on getting teacher externships, and we want to really continue to push that, because when teachers see what their children need to know, what these students need to know when they're out there in the world, it helps them know how to teach to it. So we are, at this point, it's probably a fairly low goal, but to start having at least 20 of those a year. And then we'd like to have some press releases go out every quarter to show here's what we've done, here's how far we've gone, and this is the success we've had.
And as Dr. Register referenced earlier, you've seen, I think, some draft of a strategic plan, and this does connect to Empower. So all students are empowered by having voice, choice, ownership in their own learning experiences. This plan outlines exactly how students will be able to do that, and it will ensure that all students have those essential skills and essential abilities to structure their own future. They'll have the tools that they need to navigate the world beyond high school. So what will it look like after the plan? Our students will be more prepared to succeed on high-stakes testing and college readiness tests. They will be more prepared to succeed in higher education and the workplace, and our city will have a highly skilled workforce. And our presentation. Any questions?
One moment, please. Any questions?
I'm going to ask the obvious question, which is money. This is wonderful. This is great. It's desperately needed. Can we afford to implement this?
The first year of the plan is already baked into the budget. So the hardware is in there, the teacher training is started. We have woven it, and I'll give Dr. Register credit. When I first came in and talked to him about it, he said, weave it in with Common Core. So the Common Core training has already started. One of our committees actually spent the time to thread in the technology standards, and there's several out there, and they looked at, got the best ones, and thread them into Common Core so that that can be part of it. So part of the Common Core teacher training and curriculum includes this plan. So that is what we're trying to get to. What we need to make sure of is that those parts of the budget don't get taken out in the future, and that's one of the things we're doing here. Could more money be spent on it? Yes. And we're working with the chamber, we're working with others to see in what areas could you get some additional grant funding or what have you. But for right now, it's there.
How many devices in the first year would we have available?
You have now almost 2 to 1.
Yeah.
And John Williams has a plan to actually increase that. What you've got to get to, though, is to quit thinking about it as a one-time thing. It has to be turned over every 3 years. I mean, you've got to basically buy a third every year. But we are getting to that point. The Wi-Fi is getting to that point. Right. Like I said, this school district has done a fabulous job working on hardware. Now we need to use it. So.
If I could add to that, we have...
Come to the mic, please. Yeah.
We have a $10 million capital request for technology in front of the council right now, and they're discussing it and preparing to vote on it. The governor also saw the need for capital support, and we'll be getting about $2.6 million
we testified
from the state. And Dr. Ray needs to get some credit for that, because she went up and met with the governor and really made the case. So he put $20 million in the statewide budget for that, for technology. And we are in pretty good shape. Our wireless infrastructure, we focused this past year on infrastructure, on the things that you don't see, but you have to make this work. So we focused on wiring our schools for high-density wireless devices, and we're on target to have that finished by the end of December. So all of our buildings will be wired for high-density wireless. At that point, adding devices is just a matter of ordering them and processing them, inventory, getting them in the buildings. Our real challenge, the place where we've really got to spend the energy and the money, is changing the way teachers teach, the way teachers use the technology. If we use the technology but teach the same way we've been teaching, as in a chalkboard kind of thing, and just use the iPad as an electronic chalkboard, we haven't moved the needle. As Ms. Kim said a minute ago, it's got to be a radical change. And the real challenge is getting teachers to use the devices to provide instruction differently than the way we have in the past. So that's where our focus, our real focus is. The devices are an issue, the devices are expensive, and it's not a one-time purchase. We have to continually upgrade on a cycle. But the real challenge to us is, how do we change the way we deliver content to our students?
Any other questions? Ms. Froh? Ms. Froh?
No, I'm done.
Mr. Hayes?
Thank you. On page 7, you briefly talked about human capital, teachers passing, technology, literacy assessment, 100%. Can you talk a little bit more about that assessment?
Well, we worked with the Human Capital Department, and they've identified a tool, and I know Katie Kerr is in the room. They've identified a tool that is something that they have access to. Is it a screener, or?
It's called Prove It. It's a program that would allow us to provide any test. They can do Excel, they can do Outlook, but they can also do a broader technology test for all applicants.
Right.
It would be an automatic trigger for an applicant that they would need to pass before screening to the next level. Yes.
Will you come to the mic, please?
We've clearly engaged a lot of people in developing this plan.
Sorry, it's a program that we already own. We have access to called Prove It, and it's a way for us to screen candidates on a variety of skill sets if we wish. We don't do it universally yet, but we would use this to provide a general technology assessment for our applicants, and then it would be an automatic cut score. If they don't pass, they can't move on to the next level of selection for our pool.
Is there a reason we're waiting to 2016 to say that 100% of our applicants? But I can understand if we're concerned about our existing staff, but if it's just...
No.
Right, no.
This is for all teachers.
Yeah.
100% for all teachers.
Yeah, so that we would expect our pool to be screened much quicker. I mean, we would have a pool next year that we can start to cull from.
When might we be able to screen all teachers? To know how we are today?
Yeah, that's a broader question, and we don't have the answer for you today, but we will be working on that. So
you might be able to have a test in the fall.
We could.
Maybe.
Yeah, and that'll be something in collaboration with L&L, that in Leadership and Learning Division, that we would have to kind of figure out in conjunction with the other professional development opportunities that we're working with to how to get them up to speed. With
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we want to make sure that the teachers, I mean, you've got a situation where you have a lot of teachers that came into the field before this technology is where it is today. And they're really great teachers, and many of them have adopted the technologies and are including them in their instruction in a very engaging and robust way. But not everybody. And so we need to be able to provide the professional development so that we can be confident that they have had ample opportunity to improve their teaching, I think, before we would.
But we don't know where they are today necessarily across the district. So saying 100% for 3 years,
Right.
There's no plan to get to 100%.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of the plan is giving them this training, and there is a test now that the 8th graders take, technology literacy assessment, that we could start to implement too. I would encourage you to read the detailed plan because it lists all of those types of things.
Right.
And if you have a suggestion for adding to it, I think that's great. Part of the purpose of this plan is it is very hard to go to the state, to go to the governor, to go to anybody and justify why you have these items in the budget if they don't know why and what it is that you're going to do with it. So that is what this plan is put together. This was what was frustrating to the Nashville Technology Council. We wanted to push more and more technology literacy because we want that workforce in this city. And if you said, well, we can give money, but what are you going to give it to? So that is what this plan provides. And if we would love to have input to it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't speak to the larger picture, and that's internet access.
Yes, and Laura's
that's internet
here.
access for all, and that's what Laura's working on back there. That's much bigger than the school system.
Absolutely.
Our children have access to internet at home. All children don't. Less than half of our children in this district have internet access at home. That's a part of it too. And the teaching that we're talking about, or the learning that we're talking about here, the blended learning, is very sophisticated. It's not just being able to cut on a computer and do word processing. It is blending the learning in the classroom and extended classroom. That I think we're after here.
Absolutely.
But it's everything.
So just another complexity is
Right.
The recruitment of new teachers. We hire somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 teachers a year, and they come from Teach for America, and they come from the New Teacher Project, and they come from Vanderbilt, and they come from TSU, and they come from Belmont. And so a part of the process is working with all those institutions of teacher education to see that their teacher training programs have this component built into them also. So I think 100% in 3 years is very ambitious, and it's just I think it's just a starting point for us.
Was there a reason we waited to take the 100% of the 8th graders taking the test? I guess passing the test?
Well, the reason why, these are basically suggested goals.
Right.
And Jay Steele said, I want you to hold us accountable, and we need to put some metrics down. So I want to make sure that at least every 8th grader is taking the test, that becomes part of what you're doing. and then I want them all passing it. So this is more of an accountability thing. If you want, we can add a lot more things. These are some suggestions for kind of getting it going and making sure we are actually making progress on this plan.
And if you look in that detailed document, you'll see where this is by 2016, 100%, but we may reach one by 2014.
We should.
We should have everybody take the test.
Yes.
We should have everybody take the test next year. That is our plan.
Fantastic.
And as is true when you're creating any kind of plan, the fact of creating the plan has made changes happen. So a lot of things that came out of these committee meetings and working on it already started happening before the plan was finished, which is a great thing.
Any other questions?
Questions?
Ms. Berry?
I have two questions. Remember when we had the young teacher, male teacher, who came to the board and he was working with Twitter and very innovative.
Right.
And he was asking for more access to the internet, if I'm correct.
Right.
Were we able to help him?
Yes, he has open access to Twitter now, and he is now, we're having a meeting next week about around filtering. It's a much larger issue. Internet filtering is a much larger issue than one teacher. And so we're having a meeting. He was part of building this plan. So he was a very active part of building this plan.
Good. And my second question, with Park right around the corner, are we teaching our children to keyboard? Is that part of the curriculum now?
It is part of it was part of the proposed budget. So to purchase a keyboarding system for elementary and middle, that would be implemented teachers are already emailing me, librarians specifically, wanting to know when are we going to get this started. So July 1, we'll put in the PO. We'll have the software ordered. That would be made available. They'll all be able to practice. John and I are working out a plan to get the right technology into the hand of K through 3 students so that it's age appropriate for them, size-wise. And John and I feel very confident that our kids are going to be park ready. We need to make sure, again, as Fred has said, or Mr. Carr, Dr. Rester, and Catherine, that the instruction has to change. You cannot have, and this is what I share with President Obama, the governor, pretty much everybody, you can't have an online assessment tool and not have instruction that includes that element. You just can't do it. So we want instruction and practice to incorporate, not saying that's the be-all, end-all, but it has to be part of it if the way that they're going to be assessed is an online tool.
Thank you, Keisha and Catherine.
Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you both. This is really exciting stuff. It really is. And we talked about this a little bit at the retreat. The younger kids now, they know this stuff inherently. My 5-year-old grandson knows more about my iPad than I do, and they love it. And that's the way that learning is going. So I'm so excited that we are going in that direction. So thanks to y'all both. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Any other questions?
Sorry.
You're off now.
No?
No other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. And thank you, Fred.
Chairman Mays, could I add one little piece that Dr. Ray left out? I think
sure
it's
can.
important to note. The International Society for Technology and Education, which is an international group that focuses on technology and education worldwide, is the group that we've kind of used to establish our plan. And in 2 weeks, Dr. Ray is going to be installed as its president at a meeting in San Antonio, Texas. Okay. So she will be president of ISTE for 2 weeks. A tremendous opportunity that we all intend to leverage.
Absolutely. And let me just say, Dr. Ray, thank you so much for all your work. And it must be pretty sweet to be rubbing shoulders with the president, huh? Thank you. I've lost my agenda. Give me just a second here. Okay. Dr. Register?
That's it.
That's it. Fantastic. Are there any committee reports? Love it. And I do not have a board chairman's report tonight, but I will remind you all once again that our meeting that will be held on the 20-something of this month. The 25th of this month will not be a work session. It will be a regular meeting, and we will be meeting to discuss the charter recommendations. Also, do not forget that we will have a work session in July. We normally do not have a second meeting in July, but we will have a work session in July. So, and last thing, don't forget, go out and support Ms. Frog on June 20th. Any other business? Ms. Frog, hold on.
Just quick, have you heard when we'll receive the charter recommendations? I know we have a longer cycle this year to review. We have fewer applications. We had a small amount of time last year to review before.
Yeah.
Tomorrow or Thursday?
Tomorrow or Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Coverstone. We'll shoot for Thursday, give you a little extra time there. Any other questions, any other business to discuss? Ms. Frog.
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.